It is so good to be here, and I'm so excited for this time that we're going to spend together. Whether you're hearing this live, whether you're watching this on video at our Dixon City campus or our Clark Summit campus on Sunday morning, I'll be at our Wilkes-Barre campus, and just so excited to be sharing with you how we can be freed from some of the baggage. And we're going to continue in this series, and I just can't wait for what God's going to do in this time together. Before we get into that baggage, let me just start with a story that was in the news recently. I don't know if you're familiar with this one. Have you seen this car before? Are you familiar with this car known as the Beast? This is an 8-ton Cadillac limousine, $300,000. This is the president's limousine right here. Did you hear what happened? This was reported in the Israeli Times just a few weeks ago, March 20th. And man, I love this story. Because apparently, as they were getting ready for the president's visit to Israel, they had the Beast there, and one of his staff members filled it up with the wrong kind of gas. See, the Beast, because it's a Beast, it runs on diesel, and somebody wasn't thinking, and they filled it with regular gas. And this is what happened to the president's car. You don't see that every day, a $300,000 Cadillac limo on the back of a flatbed being towed through the streets of Israel. And now all they had to do was fly in a backup. I don't know if you knew this, but we actually don't have just one, but two Beasts. And so they flew in the backup, and the president was able to go on. But I'll tell you what, when I read that story, it made me feel good, because this is just one of those moments in life when you know you're not alone, right? Because I've heard of this other guy who filled a car with the wrong kind of gas. And some of you have heard that story, and some of you want to hear it again, don't you? And so for the sake of those that haven't heard it yet, I'll tell you the classic tale of a time my wife and I were out in Texas and visited her brother, and I got to see the sights in San Antonio. Just had a fantastic time in Texas. We really enjoy getting there when we can. And finishing up our trip, and we've got our Nissan Rogue, not quite the Beast, but it was the Rogue. And we're heading back to the airport, and you got to fill it up with gas one more time before you drop it off at the rental car company. So we swing into the gas station. I hop out. I'm going to fill it with gas. And the nozzle won't fit in the gas tank. It's too big. And I'm like, what is going on here? But, it's Texas. Everything's bigger in Texas. So I figure NBD, no big deal. I don't need it to fit in there to get gas in there, right? I've played this game at the carnival before, where you shoot the water gun into the clown's mouth until you explode his head, right? I'm good at this. So I take the gas nozzle, and I'm shooting gas and I'm nailing it. I am going to win. And my wife rolls down the window. Honey, why are you putting diesel in the rental car? Oh, diesel. Right, yeah. So we'll just slide that back on and get the other one real quick, and we are out of there, okay? And I wish the story ended there, but then as we're back heading to the airport, we go to take a right-hand turn, and we get broadsided by this car that's flying up the shoulder. He spins the car around. We find out later he totaled this rental. We were actually able to drive it and get it to the airport and hand the keys to the guy. Thanks a lot for that thing. And as the dust clears, as we're sitting in the wreckage, my wife turns to me and says, well, at least nobody will ever find out about the diesel until I tell you all about it. But I tell you that story because isn't that just what we want to happen when we mess up? Don't we all wish that something could happen in the next moment that would just ensure that nobody will ever find out about what we just did? Right? Don't we wish that when we make a mess, when we make a mistake, when we go the wrong way, don't we wish there was a way to just wipe that out? And that's the question that I want to track down with you today. What do we do with our mistakes? What do we do with the mess that we make? Is there a way to get rid of that once and for all? And here's how it ties in with this series. I told you we're talking about this series on baggage. And one of the things that happens when we make mistakes, right, those mistakes turn into the baggage that we carry. Right? Those mistakes, they stay with us. And so they start weighing us down, and we take that baggage with us from one season to the next, and from one relationship to the next. And if we're not careful, we go through life like this and we try to get rid of it, and we do some little things here and there to try to drop the bags, but none of that works ultimately, does it? Right? What if there was a way that we could get rid of the bags once and for all? Would you like to know? If there was a way, if I had found out a way to get rid of your baggage once and for all, would you like me to tell you? Because I'd love to share it with you. But first, let me tell you the path that most people go down. Let me tell you what most people do to try to get rid of their bags, to try to take care of the mistakes and clean up the messes. Most people go down a path of endless sacrifices. And it's a path that goes back thousands of years. In fact, this is a path that we actually find in the Scriptures. You don't need to turn there. I'm sure your Bibles are well worn to the book of Leviticus. Probably got a lot of life verses coming out of Leviticus. I'll tell you why you get bogged down in Leviticus. Leviticus is tough. Genesis is exciting. Exodus is exciting, right? But you get to Leviticus and it's just this, it's tough. But here's why Leviticus is critical. Leviticus was their manual for how to get rid of your mistakes. Leviticus was what to do when you mess up. And they just explain all the different ways you could mess up, and here's the sacrifice, or here's the offering. It was an agricultural society, and so in order to make amends, they would often have to sacrifice an animal, or bring a grain offering, or something like that. This was God's instructions to his people, right? You've heard of the 10 Commandments. God gave the 10 Commandments to his people in the book of Exodus, and then in the very next book, here's what happens when you break the 10 Commandments. And so every time they messed up, they would look in the book of Leviticus and they would figure out, what do I do to take care of this? And just listen to some of these verses from Leviticus chapters 4 through 6. These were the instructions given to the Jewish priests. God said to them, if my people, if they mess up in this way, here's what you're supposed to do. Right? If they do this, here's what needs to happen, and they will be forgiven. Chapter 4, verse 20. If someone messes up in such and such a way, here's the offering that you need to bring, and he will be forgiven. When so-and-so does this, here's the plan, and he will be forgiven. Here's what you need to do, and he will be forgiven, and he will be forgiven. Follow this offering, and he will be forgiven, and he will be forgiven. And on and on and on it goes throughout the book. And he will be forgiven for any of these things he did that made him guilty. See, Leviticus isn't that exciting, but it's critical. It's crucial, especially to the Old Testament Israelites, the people living in that time. They needed this book because they made a mess of their lives, and they needed to figure out what to do. What do you do when you make a mistake? What do you do when you mess up? How do we get rid of that once and for all? And so this was their pattern. And let me tell you what, this is exhausting. Right? Imagine this. Can you picture this in your mind? As they would go, as they would realize, okay, here's what I did, and I have to go to the priest, and I have to make amends for that. And so they'd bring their sacrifice, they'd bring their animal, they'd bring their grain, and that would forgive their sins somehow. But then what? Then they'd mess up again, and they'd have to do another sacrifice and bring another offering. Imagine what this was like for the priests. Their work was never done. Right? Because people would mess up and they would come and they'd bring the sacrifice, and then someone else would come. And right as they're cleaning that up, someone else would come, and then you'd be back in line again. And on it would go, and it was endless. And it was exhausting. And here's a little piece of trivia from Israel's history. Israel had two different places of worship. They had this temporary space that they worshiped in, and that was called the tabernacle. Before they got settled in the land, in the promised land, they had the tabernacle. And then, when they got settled in the land, Solomon built them this temple, this unbelievable temple. And in neither of those places, get this, there were no chairs. There wasn't a single chair in the temple. There wasn't a single chair in the tabernacle. Why? Because the priest's work was never done. The priest could never sit down because there were always more sacrifices. There was always more messes. There were always more mistakes. There was always more forgiveness that was needed. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound a little bit like your life? Because it sure sounds a whole lot like my life. Right? You can never sit down. You can never slow down. You can never back down because there's always something else to clean up or fess up or own up to. Right? We keep making mistakes and we keep having to go make it right. And we have to figure out how to do that. And okay, what do we do now that we've broken that relationship? What do we do now that I've said that lie to that person? How do I get around that? What do we do now that I've got those images in my mind? Now that I've let those words go out of my mouth? And on it goes, and it's exhausting. So what do we do? What do we do when the options that we've come up with just don't cut it? Right? Even though these things might work, and even though the things that you do might work for a little while, it doesn't really solve the problem. Right? You might be able to patch up that relationship. You might be able to make things a little bit better than they were before, but the problem is much deeper than that, because the mistakes are much bigger than that, and these bags, they get pretty heavy. Right? It reminds me of the play Macbeth. Some of you might be familiar with Shakespeare's works. And this play Macbeth is about Macbeth, who's a man, and then Lady Macbeth, his creatively named wife. And so the two of them, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, have this plot to kill King Duncan. And they go ahead and they kill King Duncan. And then they try to figure out how they're going to take the throne now that the king is dead. And in some scenes, Macbeth is talking to his wife, and he's talking about the guilt that he feels from killing King Duncan. And he says something like, even the whole ocean could not wash away the blood that's on my hands. And his wife actually criticizes him. His wife puts him down for feeling guilty. His wife makes it seem like she has no problem with what's happened. You know, the crown will soon be ours. And yet in Act 5 of Macbeth, her subconscious betrays her, because in Act 5 she starts sleepwalking, and she's talking in her sleep. And I want to read you what happens in one of these scenes as one of her maidservants calls a doctor in, and they start listening to what she's saying as she walks and talks in her sleep. Listen to this. The doctor's listening, and the doctor's asking, what's going on? What is it she does now? Look how she rubs her hands. And the gentlewoman, her maidservant, says this is an accustomed action with her, to seem thus, washing her hands. I have known her to continue in this a quarter of an hour. And then Lady Macbeth speaks, yet here a spot. The doctor says, hark, she speaks. I will set down what comes from her to satisfy my remembrance the more strongly. And then Lady Macbeth says these powerful words, out, damned spot, out, I say. 1, 2, why then, 'tis time to do it. Hell is murky, yet who would have thought this old man to have had so much blood in him? Out, damn spot, I say. It's a powerful scene, and I think one of the reasons that it's so powerful is because Lady Macbeth is not the only one with blood on her hands. Lady Macbeth is not the only one who outwardly tries to make it look like everything's fine, but inwardly is being crushed with guilt. We all have blood on our hands. We all have damn spots on our hands that we can't get rid of. And try as we may, try all our best efforts, we can't get rid of the guilt on our own. We can't make things right, because you know what the problem is? The problem is so much more than mistakes and messes. The problem is that when we make those mistakes and we create those messes, we create a separation between the people that we love and ourselves. And even worse than that, we create a separation between us and God. And every time we mess up and every mistake we make just makes that separation wider. And we cannot bridge that gap on our own. We cannot clean these damn spots. We cannot get rid of these heavy bags on our own. So do you want to know how to get rid of guilt once and for all? If you want to know, turn with me to the book of Hebrews. It's a letter near the end of the Old Testament. The words will also be on your note sheet there. If you would like to know how we can get rid of the baggage of guilt once and for all, then listen to what the writer says in the book of Hebrews. He says the law, and he's talking about Leviticus, for one thing. Leviticus and those other books surrounding it. The law is only a shadow of the good things that are coming, not the realities themselves. For this reason, the law, it can never, by the same sacrifices repeated endlessly year after year, make perfect those who draw near to worship. If it could, would they not have stopped being offered? For the worshipers would have been cleansed once for all and would no longer have felt guilty for their sins. But those sacrifices are an annual reminder of sin, Because it's impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. Yes, that's exactly what we feel. And though we don't bring bulls and goats, we don't bring grain offerings, we still bring sacrifices. We try to do enough good. We try to forget the bad. We live in denial, or we divorce her, or we shun him, or we do all kinds of things to get rid of the guilt. And we know that it's not working. Therefore, because that endless sacrifice, because that path is not cutting it, therefore, when Christ came into the world, he said, sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you prepared for me. With burnt offerings and sin offerings you were not pleased, though they were required. Then he said, here I am. It is written about me in the scroll, I have come to do your will, O God. And then the writer of Hebrews explains what Jesus just said. First, he said sacrifices and offerings, burnt offerings and sin offerings you did not desire, nor were you pleased with them. That didn't cut it. Yes, that's what the law required, but that didn't take away all the guilt. That didn't get rid of all the baggage. So then, verse 9, then Jesus said, here I am. I have come to do your will. So he sets aside the first, he sets aside the law to establish the second, to establish himself as a fulfillment, as the one who's going to do all that God wants. Verse 10, and by that will, by God's will, we have been made holy through the sacrifice of the body of Jesus Christ. Listen to this, once for all. Did you hear that? Underline that. Circle that, highlight that, memorize that, once for all. It is possible to have these bags dropped once for all, right? It is possible to get rid of this stuff once and for all. But you know what? It's not through endless sacrifices. It's not by doing enough good deeds. It's not by denying it. It's not by just chalking it up to that's just who I am. It's not enough to just unfriend her or divorce him. Those things will not get rid of your baggage once and for all. Your sacrifices cannot get rid of your baggage once and for all. Your good works will never get rid of your guilt once and for all. There is nothing you can do to get rid of these bags once and for all. Only Jesus forgives once and for all. Only Jesus forgives once and for all. No one but him can offer that. Only he can offer that because he does what none of those sacrifices can do. Those sacrifices had to just continually be offered, but then he comes along perfect, never having made a mistake, never having made a mess, never having walked outside of God's perfect will. And he says, I will take your penalty on myself. I will clean up your mess. I will take your guilt on myself, and I will take the punishment for you. Only Jesus offers forgiveness once for all. Now let's continue. Listen to this. Listen to this word picture in the next verses. This is powerful. Verse 11, day after day, every priest stands and performs his religious duties again and again. He offers the same sacrifices, which can never take away sin. But when this priest, Jesus, when this priest had offered for all time one sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God. Jesus did what none of the other priests could do. Jesus did what we could not do. He sat down because his work was done once for all. And this is what I want for you. I've been praying for weeks that you would experience this. The baggage gone, and you can take a seat. You don't have to keep running. You don't have to keep trying. You don't have to keep pretending. You don't have to keep cleaning up. You can come to Jesus, and he can get rid of your bags and invite you to take a seat once and for all. Put another way, let me say it this way, and this is what I want you to remember. The price he paid is greater than the mess I made. The price he paid is greater than the mess I made, the mess you made. No matter how many mistakes you've made, no matter how big the mess, no matter how heavy the bags, no matter what you've done or who you are or how far you've run, he paid for that. The price he paid was greater than that. He was God himself. He had the ability to forgive those sins, and he chose to do that. He chose to take your sacrifice on himself so that you don't have to pay it anymore. The price he paid was greater than the mess I made. I'll tell you one more story about me and my cars. My first car was a pickup truck, an Isuzu pickup truck. Loved this truck. And I'm driving it around when I was in college, and it must have got sprayed by a skunk because it just reeked. You know, I'm driving around everywhere I go, like people that used to be my friends, they're like running away and hiding. I'm like, man. And so I would start to smell because the truck, so I'm like, this has got to change. So I scrape up whatever coins I can find, you know, under my bed in my dorm room, and I go down to the car wash and I wash that thing. You know, we got to get rid of this. Makes it a little bit better. But then the smell comes back. I'm like, what in the world, you know? So I wash it again, and this time I get an air freshener, and that kind of makes it better for a little while, but it comes back again. I'm like, man, this must have gotten into the engine. Maybe it got into the fabric. I don't know what is going on, but I could not get the smell. I'm rolling down the windows. I got the air freshener. I'm washing it all the time. What am I going to do, you know? Finally, one day, for whatever reason, I'm checking out something underneath the truck, and I see this little paw hanging out from my spare tire. A dead skunk. Yeah, because I have those friends that, you know, when you have friends like this, you don't need enemies. That's who I have. And somebody decided to, you know, a little joke. So I didn't get sprayed by a skunk. I was literally carrying around a dead skunk for weeks. Weeks, I tell you. And now this starts to make sense. This is why it gets worse when it rains. This is why that smell will never go away. Because it's not enough to wash the car. It's not enough to put an air freshener in it. It's not enough to roll down the windows when you're carrying around a dead skunk. Now listen to me. That's what some of you are doing with the baggage and the guilt that you feel. You know, you're trying to make things look better. You're putting on the deodorant. You're putting on the air freshener. You're rolling down the windows of your life. You're running and you're doing enough good, and you're trying to, you know, distract people, and you're trying to avoid the demons that are chasing you, and you're trying to do a lot of stuff outside, but the baggage of guilt is still there, and you're still carrying around that deadness within. Because there's nothing you can do to make it look good outside if that baggage is still inside. Only Jesus forgives once and for all, and only Jesus offers to not just clean up the outside, but to go and get rid of the deadness that's inside. And he paid the price that is bigger than the mess that you've made so that he can get rid of that skunk once and for all. And so now the decision is yours. And I want to call you to make a decision today. And I specifically want to talk to two groups of people. And the first group of people, I just want to focus on the word once. And I'd like you to take out this red response card that's inside your bulletins there. Take this out for a moment. And I want to first focus on once. And then I want to focus on for all. Because some of you need to make this decision once. You've never chosen to embrace Christ, to follow him, to accept his forgiveness on your behalf. You've been trying to fix it yourself. You've been trying to get rid of the bags on your own. You've been running and offering sacrifices and doing whatever you can think of to get rid of your bags and to get rid of that smell and to get rid of that deadness. And today could be the day that you turn to Christ and say, you know what? I admit that I've made a mess. I admit that I've messed up. So first you admit, and then you acknowledge that you cannot fix it on your own. You cannot get rid of the true problem on your own. You can't bridge that distance between you and God. You can't make things right once and for all. And then you simply accept what he has already done. You accept that death on the cross that we just celebrated on Good Friday, that death was for you. That was him paying the penalty for you. That was him cleaning up your mess, and you accept that once. And I want you to make that decision. If you've never made that decision before, I want you to make that decision today. And I want you to drop the bags and have a seat and see what it's like to go through life without that burden of guilt, weighing you down and separating you from God and the people that you love. And so if you've never made that decision, I beg you to make that decision today and to just circle the word once or circle the cross and then just fill out what's on the bottom there. Some of you have made that decision once, and I need you to focus on for all. Once and for all. Because some of you realize that God has forgiven you, but for some reason you are still carrying around the bags. You are still carrying around the weight of that guilt. You're still carrying around the memory of how far you went and the mess you made. And I need to tell you that forgiveness was once and for all. God has already forgiven you. You just need to accept that forgiveness. He has already paid the price. You do not need to keep making payments. He was killed for your sake. You do not need to keep beating yourself up. And I want you today to let go of that guilt, to let go of that baggage, and to embrace the forgiveness that Jesus offers once and for all. And maybe you just need to circle that suitcase. Maybe you need to circle the words for all and fill out the bottom. Because I want this weekend to be a life-changing weekend for many of you. I want you to know what it's like to have Jesus release you from that guilt, to take the bags away. I want you to exchange that baggage for the freedom of forgiveness. All because the price that he paid is greater than the mess that I made. And so here's what's going to happen now. I want to share one more verse of Scripture, and then I want to give you some time to do some business with God. A video is going to show on the side screens, and then I want you to spend some time with this response card. Those of you that need to make this decision once, those of you that need to make this decision for all, I want you to fill this out. And then after that video is done, after we've spent some time with God, then we're all going to celebrate what he has done. We're going to celebrate that death that was for us, that death that brought us freedom. And we do that through the sacred moment of communion. And if you are a follower of Christ, we invite you to partake in this. And there are 2 tables in the front, there are 2 tables in the back. And there are elements on there that have extreme significance. There are some crackers there that remind us of his body that was broken for us. And there's juice, and we take the cracker and we dip it in the juice, and it reminds us of his blood that was shed for us, the one perfect sacrifice that ended all the others. And so we're going to have that video, and then the band is going to come and lead us in a song. And anytime during that song, you can make your way to one of these 4 tables, and you can thank God for the freedom that comes when our baggage of guilt is taken away. And those of you that have filled out this card, I want you to mark this moment. I want this day to be a defining moment in your life. And while you're up, experiencing communion, perhaps for the first time, I want you to make your way to the cross that's up here on the side of our auditorium. And there are some tacks there, and I want you to tack this to the cross, leaving your baggage there, leaving your guilt there, realizing that the price that he paid is greater than the mess that you've made. And once and for all, you can be forgiven. You can be set free. That's what I want for you today. Listen to how the writer of Hebrews wraps up this passage. He says, "Their sins and their lawless acts I will remember no more. And where these have been forgiven, there is no longer any sacrifice for sin." So right now the video is going to play, and then I want you to fill out this card if you're able to do that. If this is a moment for you, then the band will come, lead us in a song, and then we'll make our way to the communion tables and to the cross. God, we invite you into this place. We are glad your presence is here, and I pray that your presence would set us free, and that those that have been burdened down by guilt and baggage would embrace the freedom that comes with forgiveness. In your name I pray, amen.